Iron bars, a prison uniform, guards pacing the halls. For most, this is the end of power, the fall, the moment when crime finally pays its debt. But for one woman in Mexico, prison was not the end. It was the center of her empire. Her name? Lola La Chata. From inside some of the harshest prisons in the country, she controlled one of Mexico's earliest drug trafficking networks. She built alliances with corrupt officials, terrified rivals, and even in death, she left a legacy that would shape the rise of the cartels we know today. This is the story of how a woman, locked away, became one of the most powerful drug traffickers of her time. Mexico City, 1910s. The bustling streets of La Merced were alive with color and noise. Stalls of fruits and vegetables. The smell of fried pork drifting through the air. Hawkers calling out prices. It was here that Maria Dolores Estevez Zaleta was born. She would later be known by a nickname that stuck to her for life, La Chata, a slang word meaning the pug-nosed one. As a child, she worked alongside her mother, selling chicharrones, fried pork skins. But the food stand wasn't just about snacks. Hidden beneath the crunchy treats, whispers say there were small packets of marijuana and morphine tucked away, ready for buyers who knew the code. By her early teens, Lola had already stepped into a world most never see. She wasn't just a seller. She was learning the streets, the networks, the handshakes, the secret language of the drug trade. The 1920s brought a surge in narcotics demand across North America. Mexico, with its sprawling border and lack of centralized control, was a perfect funnel. Lola started small, working as a mule, moving packets between suppliers and users. Her food stall made the perfect disguise, an everyday setting where drugs could change hands unnoticed. But she wasn't just another runner. She had ambition. She saw how the trade worked, where the money moved, who controlled supply. She learned that drugs weren't just contraband, they were power. Her chance came in Ciudad Juarez, a city that had already become a hotspot for trafficking into the United States. There, she made connections with powerful traffickers, forging ties that would allow her to move morphine and heroin across borders. By the time she returned to Mexico City, she wasn't a street-level seller anymore. She was a boss. In La Merced, Lola La Chata transformed her modest business into a distribution hub. Her food stand became a front for narcotics. From under the table, morphine, heroin, and marijuana flowed to addicts, gangsters, and even some members of Mexico's elite. She wasn't reckless. She used bribery as her shield. Police officers and local officials were kept well-fed and well-paid. Arrests could be avoided with a simple envelope. Investigations disappeared. Raids came with advance warnings. Lola understood something few traffickers at the time did. Corruption was the true infrastructure of drug trafficking. And she wasn't alone. By the late 1930s, she had built a family operation, enlisting her husband, kids, and loyal allies to help run her growing empire. But success brought attention, and with attention came danger. In 1934, Mexican authorities launched a campaign to clean up the streets of Mexico City. They wanted to crack down on the growing narcotics trade, and right in their sights was La Chata. She was arrested and sent to Islas Marias, a brutal island prison in the Pacific. For many, this would have been the end. The island was notorious for breaking spirits, an isolated colony surrounded by shark-infested waters, built to keep prisoners cut off from the world. But Lola wasn't like other prisoners. From the moment she arrived, she began building alliances. Guards could be bribed. Food and privileges could be bought. Messages flowed in and out through intermediaries. Her drug network didn't collapse. It adapted. Her lieutenants on the outside kept the trade alive, while Lola gave the orders from within prison walls. In fact, prison became something of a headquarters. She would be arrested multiple times throughout her life, in Mexico City, in Puebla, and again in Islas Marias. Each time, authorities believed they had finally stopped her. But each time, she proved them wrong. Lola's secret was her ability to blur the line between criminal and authority. Inside prison, she didn't behave like an inmate. She behaved like a boss. She paid off guards to carry her messages. She had influence over prison staff. Even prisoners looked to her for favors, protection, and access. Outside, her family and trusted lieutenants kept the shipments moving. The markets in La Merced remained stocked with drugs, and her routes to the U.S. stayed active. Newspapers of the time painted her as a villainous mastermind. Some called her a witch, a corrupter of morals, the Queen of Mexico's vice trade. But for many in her community, Lola was something else entirely, a provider. She gave jobs. She handed out money. She kept her neighborhood afloat. In an era of poverty and limited opportunity, Lola La Chata became both feared and respected. Her power wasn't just about the drugs. It was about her ability to buy loyalty. Police officers who were supposed to stop her were often on her payroll. Politicians who campaigned on law and order turned a blind eye when her money crossed their desks. At her funeral years later, nearly a third of the attendees were former police officers. That fact alone says everything about the depth of her reach. Prison never broke Lola La Chata because prison itself was already part of her network. The walls kept her body inside, but her empire stretched far beyond. By the 1940s and 1950s, Lola's name was infamous across Mexico. She was written about in newspapers, whispered about in political circles, and cursed in law enforcement offices. And yet, no matter how many times she was locked up, no matter how many headlines proclaimed her downfall, she kept resurfacing. Her empire outlived her sentences. Her rivals feared her. Her community both loved and hated her. And the government couldn't decide whether she was an enemy or a business partner. Because, truth be told, too many people were making money off her trade. When Lola was sentenced to Islas Marias, most thought it was over. The prison was designed to crush leaders, isolated on a remote archipelago off Mexico's Pacific coast. It was meant to be the end of her influence. But for Lola, the prison gates were not a wall. They were merely another border to cross. She quickly recognized that inside prison, survival and comfort weren't guaranteed by guards. They were purchased. Food, cigarettes, blankets, companionship. Everything had a price. And Lola had money. She had leverage. More importantly, she had loyalty from the outside. Her smuggling network adapted. Drugs were hidden in shipments of supplies to the island. Bribed guards carried envelopes, not just food parcels. Even prisoners' families became couriers, unknowingly carrying coded messages or cash to intermediaries on the mainland. While the government celebrated her conviction, Lola's operations never slowed. She orchestrated routes, managed disputes, and collected payments, all from a prison cell. To understand Lola's power, we have to understand Mexico at the time. In the 1940s, corruption was not just an inconvenience, it was structural. Police officers, judges, politicians, many were either underpaid or overpressured. And Lola La Chata had mastered the art of buying influence. Some reports claimed entire squads of police officers were on her payroll. Her reach was so deep that even behind bars, she enjoyed privileges most inmates couldn't imagine. Witnesses claimed she received visitors daily. Some came to pay respects, others to cut deals. Even journalists were invited, granted audiences in exchange for favorable coverage. It became clear, prison didn't reduce her empire. It legitimized her myth. She became known not as a woman crushed by the system, but as a woman too powerful for the system to crush. In 1959, Lola's reign came to a sudden end. She died in prison, reportedly of a heart attack. But whispers spread that her death was caused by a heroin overdose, her own product turning on her. The truth never fully emerged. What mattered was her funeral. Nearly 500 people attended. A third of them were police officers, former allies, old rivals. Friends and enemies alike came to pay respect. The scene was surreal. A woman once branded the scourge of Mexico was buried with honor among those sworn to uphold the law. It was less a funeral than a statement. Lola La Chata's influence had transcended crime. She had become part of Mexico's history. Today, Lola's story lives on not as a folk legend, but as a blueprint. She pioneered criminal strategies that cartels still use today. Corruption as armor, making police and officials part of her network rather than opponents. Prisons as hubs, turning punishment into opportunity. Women as leaders, showing that female traffickers weren't outliers but contenders. Modern figures like Sandra Avila Beltran, known as La Reina del Pacifico, echo Lola's rise. But unlike many who followed, Lola never relied on flashy violence or blood-soaked brutality. Her power came from subtlety, from weaving her business into the fabric of everyday life, from being underestimated until it was far too late. For decades, drug lords have been portrayed as men with guns, gold, and brutal reputations. But Lola La Chata broke that mold. She ran a narcotics empire from a street corner in Mexico City. She maintained it through exile and imprisonment. And even in death, she was honored by those who should have condemned her. Her story forces us to ask difficult questions. How much of crime is enabled by poverty? How much by corruption? And how much by the simple fact that power respects power, no matter who holds it? She sold pork cracklings on the streets. She ended as one of Mexico's first narco queens. And from prison, Lola La Chata proved one chilling truth. Bars may hold the body, but they cannot cage an empire.